So I am now going to turn over the floor to Ryan Claytor. So Ryan is a professor of comics at Michigan State University. He is a published author, artist, and has done really, really interesting things with Kickstarter and with self-publishing. He's kind of done pretty much everything possible that you could do. Plus, he probably is not going to go into this now, but you created the comics program at Michigan State. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so he built it up from the ground up. And he has talked with us before about Kickstarter and about organizing an online book tour. So if you're a member of Studio, you can go look up his previous presentations, which are totally amazing. But today, the reason that we're having you with us today, Ryan, is because you reached out to me to tell me about your latest project. And just as a line that you said in the email, you're like, I was really creatively exhausted. And then to my surprise, this project came out of it. And I was like, oh, that's such a good topic to talk about. How do you get out of creative exhaustion? Because I think everybody can identify with that. So that's why we're here today.
Cool. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, Jana, and for that very kind introduction. And before we get into Ryan Claytor's stuff today, I also wanted to bounce off something you said just a little earlier about Kids Comics Studio. As a member of Kids Comics Studio, even if you're not part of Pitch Fest or the critique groups, like there are a ton of video resources on there that are easily worth the price of admission. So like if I can just give like a quick testimonial, I'd say thumbs up to Kids Comics Studio if you're not in there already. So anyway, Jana, thank you. Lisa, thank you for organizing this and getting all the behind the scenes stuff going. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So this is my new book. And before we get started, I thought I would just sort of go over an outline for what you can expect from this presentation. So this is the Mirror Drawings book launch with me, and we're going to start out with a little introduction to me in case I don't know you. And then we'll talk about my newest book called Mirror Drawings. And then I'd like to sort of step back and pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about the path that it took for me to get to this new book, because I think that leads really nicely into the topic of discussion that we all want to talk about today, which is emerging successfully from creative exhaustion. And Jana, thank you for pushing me toward this this topic of discussion today. And then after that, I'll open it up to some Q&A. So first of all, my name is Ryan Claytor. I am a university professor, as Jana mentioned, and also a comics artist. So I'd like to first focus on the university professor part. So here is my business card, so you can see it really is for true. I am a university professor of comics, and I spearheaded the comic art and graphic novel minor course of study at Michigan State University. And as the coordinator of the minor, I wear a great many comics hats around campus, starting with the Michigan State University Comics Forum. I am the director of this event that has run for 14 consecutive years at this point. We've brought all sorts of award-winning creators and scholars as keynote speakers. We have many, many ancillary events for the forum, from Artist Alley with dozens of creators behind the table of their own work. We have academic panel discussions with scholars coming from literally all over the world. And we've had tons of different folks like Emil Ferris, Seth, James Sturm, Lucy Knisley, Stan Sakai, Sergio Aragones. The list goes on and on. So I'm super proud of what we've been able to put together with the MSU Comics Forum. If you want to find out more about it, you can go to comicsforum.msu.edu. In addition to that, we also have the Michigan State University Comic Art and Graphic Novel podcast, which I host and produced from 2016 to 2020. So we've got about 40 episodes banked with, again, lots of different award-winning, heavy-hitting cartoonists. And I would be remiss if I did not mention this unassuming glassed in reading room at Michigan State University. This is right as you enter the main door of the main library. You can see over on the right-hand side, there's the front door of the library. And then this may not look like much, but underneath this floor in the basement of the main library sits the largest public collection of comic books in the world, anywhere ever in the universe. And this is all thanks to one man. His name is Randy Scott, who has been amassing this collection since the early 1970s until today. He is still working today and has recently announced his retirement at the end of this month. So after 50 years of lifetime worth of work, he has amassed the world's largest collection of comic books. So this is a resource that I will often hang my hat on when I go to the administration and say, we need to create an event. We need to create more classes. We need to create a minor. We have the world's largest collection of comic books, and we should be leveraging that. So that's a little bit about comic studies at Michigan State University and what I do there. But I'm also a comics artist in my own right. So that all started way back in the summer of 2003 when I interned at Marvel Comics, then in New York City. And I did everything from working in the bullpen, learning industry technical standards, to working with the last in-house letterer at the time. All talent at Marvel and DC and everywhere is freelance. Nobody's in-house anymore. So I felt very fortunate to work with the last in-house letterer. And then filtered around to editorial, manufacturing, and sat in on print and production meetings. So after that summer, I was extraordinarily motivated to make my own work. And I created my own self-publishing company called Elephant Eater Comics, which was established that following year in 2004. And I know that's kind of a funny name, and people ask me about that frequently. Why Elephant Eater Comics? And it's a saying that my dad would tell me and my siblings when we were young. He would say, well, it's like eating an elephant. You just do it one bite at a time, and before you know it, you're done. So I always think about that when I have big tasks in front of me, like going through school or making a book. It just kind of keeps me grounded and pays tribute to my pops too. So way back in 2004, I was creating my own series of autobiographical comic books. I was gravitating toward nonfiction work, true to life comics, and thought I'd try my hand at it. And these are the first 4 series of my autobiographical comic book series. Those were then collected into a larger edition, and that led to many, many different additional books. I'm going to flip through these pretty quickly just for the sake of time because I don't want to take up too much time today, but just know that there were a great many books in my past. And in addition to creating books, I also do illustration for hire. For example, the largest pinball production company in the world hired me to do their 30th anniversary logo. I also have worked for National Basketball Association players like Todd McCulloch, who hired me to do an illustration for his own arcade, in addition to the largest pinball championships in the world, asked me to do their work as well. I also design custom neon signs for people's game rooms and also businesses. This is a sign for the Welsh Historical Society in Sunfield, Michigan. It's a double-sided flag sign, and I've done quite a number of those now as I partner with a local neon fabricator who has been bending neon for over 30 years, and he is just an absolute master. So I love doing this. And I also design watches for London-based company Mr. Jones Watches, and this is the first one I did for them called Step Right Up. You can see it's sort of a carnival scene, and the hours are the ducks on top and the minutes are the targets on the bottom, and those spin around throughout the day. When this was released, it's sold out of its limited 100 edition run in a company record-breaking time of 2 hours. So after this watch, they said, okay, what do you want to do next? And I proposed this watch you see here, which is called Ricochet. So this is a triple gilded watch with 3 different robots in gold, palladium, and copper, all playing a pinball machine. And you see the time is the score on the pinball machine there. This is a really cool automatic movement. It has a jump hour, so that hour flips at the start of every hour. You can hardly see it move. It just kind of sort of clicks right over. And this broke company sales records yet again and sold out in 30 minutes. So they reissued this design, which is now currently available in their store. Right? So getting us back on track for the books, I thought I would fast forward to 2019 when I came out with a book called Coin-Op Carnival with my best bud, Nick Baldridge. We co-wrote this book together, and I illustrated the entire thing. And it's kind of like an illustrated magazine. It's about electromechanical coin-operated amusement devices, which put in layman's terms is about old pinball and arcade games manufactured prior to 1978, prior to the advent of printed circuit boards and television screens and all that. So in this issue, we have an interview with the world's most prolific pinball designer, Wayne Nyans. We have game reviews, text segments, and even pages of full-blown comics. I'd say about 20% of the 64-page issue is full-blown comics. And we were really proud of this issue and toured it. And to our delight and surprise, it received some recognition, like the top prize in the Small Press and Alternative Comics Expo Space Prize when it came out. In addition to a couple of nods from different industries, we got nominations from the This Week in Pinball Awards and the Ringo Comic Book Industry Awards as well. After that, I did a book which some of you may be familiar with because I came to Kids Comics Unite to chat about it a little while ago. This is A Hunter's Tale, and this book was originally a poem that was written by my grandfather 40 years ago. So this is my grandfather and I back in 1985, and over the course of 2021, I converted this poem into comic book form and then kickstarted and printed it, which we'll get to in a little bit. But that kind of brings us up to speed to my newest book, which is Mirror Drawings. Now, for this book, to introduce this to you, I wanted to do something that I've never done before. Nobody has ever seen this to date. Like, you are the first folks to see this. And this is the comic book introduction to the book Mirror Drawings. So I hope this goes all right because you are my test audience. You can let me know what you think at the end. But I thought I'd pull these panels out and try to highlight this and read it to you. And I think it provides a pretty good introduction to what this book is. So the introduction to Mirror Drawings goes like this. Hi, I'm Ryan. Shortly before the drawings in this book were created, I single-handedly signed, packed, and shipped hundreds of unique orders for my prior book, A Hunter's Tale. It was my most successful book launch to date, but with the printing and fulfillment process taking months to complete, it was also my most exhausting. Following that experience, I found myself in a bit of a creative pause. I have plenty of projects that I want to accomplish, but they all felt a little too daunting to undertake so soon after all that orchestration. So I started looking around for a low-stakes way to get my hands moving. Merrick Bennett, a cartoonist friend of mine, was sharing images of these mirror doodles he created in his sketchbook. They looked so carefree, and the results were always a little surprising. I tried my hand at one, and it felt great to have a finished illustration after doing only 25% of the work to create it. And so here we go to the second page. And it says, I started doing more. They didn't take very long. It was enjoyable to find different ways to mask the mirrored portions, like including symmetrical objects on the mirrored seams. Playing with a number of mirrored sections. So, traditionally I would create it in a corner of my sketchbook and mirror it 4 times. But then I started thinking, well, what if I included like 1.5 of something, and then that could create 6 and make it look a little bit different than the rest. And occasionally changing elements digitally after the fact, after the drawing was complete. These drawings felt meditative, restorative, and ultimately fun to create. My hope is that you'll feel a similar way as you encounter surprises when seeing these drawings unfold. And perhaps even participate with me by coloring some of the pages in this book. I printed them on uncoated paper to help facilitate that. Regardless of how you choose to interact with this book, I wish the same feelings of rest and reflection for you that I felt during their creation. So there is the comic book introduction to my new book called Mirror Drawings. And I thought I would pause the, I'm sorry, my words are eluding me, the slideshow that I'm doing right now, and just give you a little peek at the Mirror Drawings Kickstarter page, which has a whole 10 hours to go. This is the very last day that this Kickstarter is available. So if you're interested, you can find this at mirrordrawings.com. I tried to make a really easy URL to remember. Mirrordrawings.com will take you right here. And essentially, so to start things out, this campaign has been going very well. So my initial goal was $1,200. We have more than 6 times exceeded that funding goal right now. And because of that, we have blasted through a ton of stretch goals. So this is going to be bigger and more fancy than I ever proposed it to be. So there are more pages. I'll get to that in a second. It now has a built-in ribbon bookmark. This is a hardback book, in case you couldn't tell. So more fanciness. We've upgraded the paper stock from 80-pound to 100-pound paper. And we're even going to have foil stamping on the book cover itself. And if all that wasn't enough, I originally proposed a 48-page book. It is now doubled in size to 96 pages. And all of this is for the same price of entry. So the reason I was doing all this is because of that former project, A Hunter's Tale, that took a whole lot of my time, and I felt super exhausted. And so this was really a restorative project for me. And I hope it will be for you too, because I'm printing this on really high quality, uncoated paper stock so that you can draw this, color in this as well. This is what the book is going to look like. And here is an example of just one of the drawings. And each of the drawings is going to be paired with a photograph of the sketchbook page so that you can see how it's sort of mirrored into existence. Now, some of these illustrations are more abstract, like the one you just saw, and some are more figurative, like these rockets blasting off of this planet. And again, each one will be paired with the original sketchbook page in the same spread. So I'll just cruise through a few of these illustrations here. You see some pumpkins, some more abstract illustrations, some more figurative illustrations. And I was just really having a blast creating these. And I hope that you will have a blast looking at them and maybe even coloring them. So this is like a high-end art book / coloring book that I hope you might interact with. Okay. Got a number of different ways to interact with this book and to grab a copy of the book as well, from digital to physical. I even have some very fancy prints, which maybe I can even show you. I have one right here. I'm gonna try cease sharing. And I made these raised gold foil prints. There are a couple of them. And I really wanted to do something special for the print tier. I've never seen anything like this before, and I sourced this from a printer that I didn't think I was going to be able to make this work for a reasonable price, but thankfully I was, and I have them in my hands. They're gorgeous, and I can't wait to share them with people. So that is available as part of the print tier. You can see a little closer up here. And here is the second of the prints as well. And I've got a ton of different entry points here, from original art pages. You can get original art from the book itself, to holiday gift packs. That's one of the things I'm trying to wrap up here in late October so that I can have these books to you before Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Christmas, whatever you happen to celebrate. I'll have these books to you. That is my plan by mid-December. And I even have things like a creative consultation tier where I will chat with you individually. This is not a group discussion. This is you and me talking about the trajectory of your creative career. What are your creative interests? What are your crowdfunding goals? What would you like to do? I've been self-publishing my work for a couple decades at this point. I'm also a university professor, as I mentioned before. So I've got some experience that I really enjoy sharing with people. So in addition to getting the book signed with the prints and a piece of original artwork, you also get a 30-minute one-on-one creative consultation, and there's only 5 of those available. And then finally, a signed gift pack. Okay. All right. So let's hop back to that presentation. And so that was all the exciting and shiny stuff about this book, right? But I want to talk to you about the path that it took to get here, because that's not so shiny. And I want to make that more public and more normalized. So in the lead up to this book, I mentioned this prior campaign for my prior book. I chat with Kids Comics Unite about this back in January of this year. And this campaign did super well. There were over 400 backers and 5-digit funding for this little $8 book. It was bonkers. By far, my most successful book launch to date, as I mentioned in that introductory comic. And here's a picture of me with the 2,000 books I had printed because of this crowdfunding campaign. All those books needed to be packed and shipped. And this is my home office and what it looked like after months of coordination and printing and packing and fulfilling. All these books occupied a literal mail truck. And this is in front of my house as these books all got shipped off. In addition to this, I also had national distribution through Diamond Comics. So this is not even all the packing that I had to do. All this to say, I have a black screen here because this was a really exhausting portion of a successful story, right? Like my most successful campaign to date, you know, big celebrations and horns and lights blaring down, and it was fantastic. But that came with some real world practicalities. And after doing all that, I was just super spent. So how does one emerge successfully from creative exhaustion like that? And I want to give you some bullet points to kind of think about and go through. So first of all is to recognize the fact that burnout is happening. I think for a long time in my own creative career, when I would, you know, really create or promote hard, I would come to this burnout point, but not know what was happening. So I wanted to list a few things that you might be able to look out for if this might be happening to you. So one is fatigue. You know, you're just spent, you're tired. I think that's easy enough. Also a feeling of overwhelm. I mentioned in that introductory comic that I have a lot of projects that I want to get to, but they all felt pretty overwhelming, like after doing that gigantic fulfillment. And also kind of a lack of motivation. Like I knew what I wanted to do, but I couldn't get myself to do it. And these 3 were all pretty prevalent for me. This is kind of how this creative exhaustion manifested itself for me. But there are many other ways that this can take place, like insomnia. I don't know about you guys, but when I've got a big project on my mind and it's all kind of coming to a head, like I have difficulty getting a decent night's sleep. Also, big feelings like sadness or anger or irritability, like these can all manifest themselves a little more prominently when you're experiencing burnout. You can also feel excessive stress. You know, we're all under some sort of stress, but when that starts to ramp up, you might start trying to take a step back and think, okay, what's happening bigger picture in my life? Am I experiencing burnout? Do I need to do something about this? And finally, I wanted to mention also alcohol or substance misuse. If you find yourself using any type of crutches in more or different ways, again, another trigger to look out for. So here are a few things that you can maybe think about. And then if you recognize these, step back a little bit and see if maybe you can understand what's going on here. Now, if you recognize that burnout is happening with you, the first thing I would suggest is to try to be okay with it. And for a long time, when I did recognize burnout, like, okay, I just did this big project and now I'm feeling creatively exhausted and I don't want to do anything. I've got that lack of motivation. I'm feeling fatigued. And I would really start to worry. I would think, oh my God, is that it? Am I done? Is that the last project I'm ever going to do? Because I'm feeling this way. And is this feeling going to perpetuate? After doing this for 20 years, I can assure you it does not last forever. So first of all, try to just recognize it and then be okay with, okay, I see what's going on here. I'm feeling a little fatigued. I'm feeling a little burnt out, but this feeling is temporary. So once you recognize all that and you're okay with it, then you can start to kind of relax into it and explore things that give you joy. Okay? So really try to get that creative gumption back by doing what you want. One of the things that I did was start to explore different courses. I'm a teacher, but I also love to be taught and learn new things. So I started looking into Skillshare programs and Domestika programs, and even started taking one on Posca markers. So I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. I made my way through undergrad and graduate school for art and never took a painting class. Like I've never been taught painting in my life. And so I was like, yeah, you know, I kind of want to work with paints, but at the same time, like, I don't want to get a bunch of brushes and I hate cleanup. So these Posca markers were really a way for me to get into that and explore paint in a little more illustrative way. So I started doing some tests and I really loved what they did on top of either dark or textured paper, because they work in a really opaque way, which you can't really do with watercolors or markers or colored pencils. So I started working with these textured papers and making my own Posca marker illustrations in a number of different ways, grabbing metallic pens. You can see there's sort of some metallic sheen on this as well. And that was something I was exploring. Another thing I was exploring was cross-stitching. So I am a big gamer fanatic, and I have big, soft, squishy, nostalgic feels for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which came out when I was a kid. And there is a tradition in cross-stitching where the cross-stitcher will demonstrate their proficiency by making a sampler pattern, which has all sorts of different things and is supposed to, one, give you an example of all the different things that you can do as a cross-stitcher, so you can sort of refer back to it and say, okay, I want to create a border like this. But it's also like sort of a feather in the cap of the cross-stitcher, because like, hey, look at all this stuff I can do. So that's kind of the backstory of what sampler patterns are. But I thought I would design and create my own sampler pattern of Metroid sprites from the old NES game. So all of these are actually cross-stitched. I'm actually working on another gaming inspired cross-stitch as we speak. This is a Mega Man 2 stage select screen that I'm working on right now. So this is another instance of something that I was just exploring as I was trying to make my way through this creative exhaustion. I mentioned that I'm big into gaming, right? Another thing that came out recently is this little tiny handheld device called a Playdate. And it looks like an old retro Game Boy or something, right? Except for the fact that it has a crank that you can use for gameplay. And because of this, you have all sorts of different ways to explore gameplay. And I mention all this to say, let's get back in here, sharing the screen again. I tried designing my own Playdate game. Now I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. The screen is really small, but I started making my own sprites, making my own game, making my own animations. And this was another thing that I was doing just to explore a new medium and make my way through this creative exhaustion. Okay. So before we get to this, I also wanted to show you another thing I was doing to combat this creative exhaustion. And this may look a little more familiar because it is the mirror drawings that I've been creating for the past several months. Okay, so these are all just, corner pages in my sketchbook that you see here. And I show you all this to say, I did not just be exhausted and then say, I'm going to make my next book. That is not what happened. You can see this wild and varied and twisting and multi-forked path that I took in order to get to this book that I'm showing you today. So my apologies for hopping back and forth to this screen share thing, but I feel like I have lots of stuff I want to show you. Okay, so after I was making my way through all this, I started sort of gravitating toward one of these things. I didn't finish everything I showed you. Like I did a couple of Posca marker drawings I showed you, but I didn't keep doing that. I did part of a video game, and would I like to finish it one day? Yeah, maybe, possibly, but I did not finish it. I started doing mirror drawings, and that was something that I really enjoyed. And so the next step of this emerging successfully from creative exhaustion, I would urge you to just be aware of what you are enjoying and indulge in that. So I made the first mirror drawing, and I'm like, oh, well, that was interesting. I'm going to do it again. And then I tried another and continued to enjoy it and just sort of indulged in that. And afterward, well, during the course of making these, I was showing these to my patrons. I have a Patreon page, and I was showing them all of the stuff I just showed you that I was doing in real time. And one of the things that came out of that was a reaction from a number of folks about, hey, these mirror drawings, these are really interesting. Do you have more of them? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, I have been making quite a number of these. And it wasn't just one person that said, oh, hey, this is cool, or, oh, I don't like that. It was multiple people that showed interest in this project. And that's something that I would, again, urge you to do, is to consider feedback from others, but don't give a lot of weight to a single opinion. So if one person says, hey, that mirror drawing is really cool, you should make a book out of that, well, they might just be being polite. But if multiple folks say, oh, that's really interesting, are there more? Oh, wow, maybe you should think about doing this. I really like that mirror drawing. Do you have others? That's a sign that maybe you're onto something. So when my patrons started perking up and telling me that these are interesting, I thought, okay, maybe there's something here. So then I took it to a little larger group, which is my email update list. So I have, over a dozen patrons. I have about 1,500 email folks. So I sent it out to them in my next update and said, here's something I've been working on. And again, I got a lot of great feedback. So at that point, I thought, well, I was never in a million years thinking these little corner illustrations were going to be my next book, but people seem to really be enjoying these. And so maybe I'll start conceptualizing how this might work as my next project, not just as the illustrations, but developing this additional collaborative element with the drawings in, or with the coloring in it as well. So I would urge you to pay attention to the feedback of others. And then finally, eat that elephant. Just like my dad used to tell me, do one bite at a time, and before you know it, you're done. So that's exactly what I was doing with these mirror drawing illustrations, is to just do one at a time. And they did not emerge instantly. I've been doing these for the past half a year at this point. So I have folks that will come to me and say, oh my gosh, Ryan, you're on your second campaign of the same year. Like, how are you releasing 2 books in the same year? That's crazy. Well, I think it's a little less crazy than it might appear, because if we pull back that curtain and take a look, I was done with fulfillment of A Hunter's Tale at the end of March 2022. We're now in October of the same year. So that's a good half a year's time for me to explore, try out some Posca markers, try a video game design, try some mirror drawing illustrations, see that I like those, and then slowly chip away, doing a corner illustration in my sketchbook every day or 3 or week. It didn't matter. Sometimes I was doing 1 a day, sometimes I was doing 1 a week. But the fact is, this slow productivity eventually compiles upon itself. And that works for mirror drawings, or making comic books, or graphic novels, or going through school, or anything. So that would be my suggestion for maintaining a healthy rate of production slowly every day. So there's some tips for emerging successfully from creative exhaustion, and how I managed to do that with my new book, Mirror Drawings. So at this point, I would be happy to take some questions and answers if you have any about Mirror Drawings, the book, or emerging from creative exhaustion, or anything else.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I know I have a couple questions, but I don't want to be the first one. I would like to see who else here has questions for Ryan.
Sounds like it might be time for your questions, Jana.
Oh, I'm so comfortable with uncomfortable silence.
You're better than me then.
I have questions too, Jana.
Okay.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, why don't you ask a question, Lisa?
Okay, so one of my questions is, I asked this in another presentation too, because I feel like you seem like you are fearless about just trying new things, and you just do it. And I'm just wondering like where that comes from, and how you think people could kind of cultivate that.
That's a good question. I grew up as kid number 7 of 7. But I really grew up with just my next oldest brother. So the first 5 kids are from my dad's previous marriage, and the oldest is 20 years older than me. So there's a short spread between the first 5. All that to say, most of them were out of the house by the time I was cognizant of the fact that I had 6 other siblings. So it was just my next oldest brother and I, who is 5 years older than me. So my mother is the world's best mom and was always showering me with praise. So I think like I have a reasonable self-esteem. At the same time, my next oldest brother was continually like berating me and giving me insults, and we were always fighting when we were growing up. We're good now, but like growing up, there was that constant like sibling rivalry. And so I think it was sort of a combination of those that helped me like just be confident in myself. Like anytime I was at school and somebody, you know, called me a nerd or whatever, it was like, oh, I've heard a lot worse than that before. So like it wasn't that big a deal. So I think that kind of helped inform my self-esteem. And I don't know, in terms of like how to help others do the same and just try new things. All that stuff that I showed you, I don't really show anybody. I'm not parading my cross stitch around or trying to sell books with it or do a Kickstarter campaign about it. It's mainly for me. And you can take that approach in whatever you do. You don't have to think, okay, this is for publication. This is something I'm going to share. You can just try things out without the pressure of having to publish or get feedback on something. Now, with that said, I mentioned the fact that I have a Patreon page, and I personally really like sharing what I'm doing, even if it's like off the wall, cross stitch, video game design, neon design, watch design, illustrations, whatever. Like I do all that stuff and I'm passionate about it. And I like sharing that with folks. So my Patreon page is a great outlet for me to say, okay, this is the current wacky thing I'm working on this week. And then eventually something sort of emerges as the next project. In this case, sort of an organic way. Like I was not expecting Mirror Drawings to be my next book at all. But again, just remaining open to feedback. People were interested. And now the Kickstarter campaign is over 6x funded, which just absolutely blows my mind. Like when I was first creating this Kickstarter page, I did not know if people would have any interest in buying a book like this. So I was super hedging my bets, thinking, okay, worst case scenario, if I want anything, I'm going to make this a 48-page book. I feel like that's a reasonable number of pages. And I want it to be a hardback book. I was pretty adamant about that. But again, I'm like, is anybody going to buy a hardback book with these mirror illustrations? I didn't know. And then finally, I wanted this component of interactivity, this coloring portion of the book, to be available if people wanted it to. So that meant a couple things. One, I had to print on uncoated paper stock so it could receive media. But secondly, there are a couple different ways to bind hardback books. One is glue bound, which basically means you take a stack of paper and you slather a bunch of glue on the edge and then you wrap the cover around it. That is the less expensive way to bind a hardback book. However, when you open that book, it does not open the entire way. Like it'll open to about 90 or 120 degrees, but it will not lay flat. And I could not have that if I was going to include this component of interactivity, of coloring. So the other way of binding a hardback book is through section sewn binding. And that is with, physically stitching the pages together in the book and then wrapping it in the cover. And that will lay flat nicely. I mention all that to say, section sewn binding was about twice the cost of glue binding. So when I came to that realization, I really had a moment of faith questioning, like, oh gosh, this means I'm going to have to get this means I'm either going to have to increase the price of the book by double, or I'm going to have to get double the amount of backers. I super did not want to increase the price of the book. I was very adamant about staying at that price point. And I was super nervous about even getting the amount of folks I needed to print the book, that $1,200 funding goal that I showed you. But thankfully, there have been not only enough people to get that $1,200 funding goal, but enough to start piling on all those stretch goals. So while I was very nervous about the campaign even funding, I tried to also plan for like best case scenario. What if people did buy this book? What if a bunch of people bought this book? And, you know, one of the things I've heard a lot about Kickstarter campaigns is that one of the things people fail to do is plan for success. Like, what would it look like if you were really successful? And sorry, I'm giving such a long-winded answer to this question, but my very first Kickstarter campaign I did back in 2013, I had a $3,000 goal to print a perfect bound book of my latest comic. And I thought, boy, do I ever hope that I get this $3,000. And I did. And then it continued to fund after that. And I thought, boy, howdy, this is super exciting. What'll I do? I don't know. I want to reward people because they were so generous to me. So if the campaign reaches $4,500, everybody gets my next book for free, which was super dumb. It was a really bad idea on my part. And thankfully, it stopped just short of $4,500, because when that campaign ended, I ran all the numbers. Again, this is my first campaign. And I took into account shipping and packaging and printing and also the Kickstarter fees and the credit card fees and everything else. And I essentially broke even, a little bit more, but essentially broke even. It was not to the point where I could print a whole nother book and ship it out to everybody in a second shipment. It was just, I mention all this to say that was an instance of someone, me, not planning for success. I was caught up in the excitement of the campaign, and I, wanted to thank people. And, I think my heart was in the right place, but my mind was not. So all that to say, with that experience, I've now been able to step back. And even with insecurities, even with going into the mirror drawings campaign, wondering if I'm even going to be able to print a book. And I thought, if I do not meet my funding goal, then not a big deal. I can just reassess. I super want this to be a really nice hardcover book. But if the interest isn't there, maybe I just retool the campaign, quote out a saddle stitched book. It's going to be far less expensive, and the same number of people that jump in could probably make that happen. That wasn't the case. There was a ton of interest, as you see. So all that to say, step back, planned a bunch of stretch goals, and I have copious Excel spreadsheets documenting, like, what would I need in order to bump up 16 pages? What would I need to then move to ribbon bookmark? Because that's something that I super love, and I think is just such a nice touch to a book. What would I need to upgrade the paper stock, or add foil stamping, or add 16 more pages, or now double the amount of pages? And we hit every single one of those stretch goals. Just, again, I didn't know if this would fund, and it 6x funded and made this the book of my dreams. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
I was thinking, Ryan, while you were talking and about your question, Lisa, I feel like one of the big issues among many people is relying on external validation, like external versus internal validation. And it's I wonder if women struggle with that more than men, like this like people pleasing aspect, and feeling like, you're, and it also has to come up. It also has to do with the way we're educated. This is something that I think about a lot. This emphasis on doing well with your grades and your test scores, and the school just hammer into the kids' heads, like, if you don't succeed, you're not going to be able to go to college. You're not going to get a good job. You're not blah, blah, blah. And it's really, I think, insidious.
I have so many feelings about what you just said. I want to give you space to finish your thought and or question, though.
Oh, no, it was a statement.
I wholeheartedly agree with your statement. And in so many ways, I mean, first of all, I always feel a little strange voicing my opinions about this in front of you, Jana, because I know that I come at this from a self-publishing point of view, right? You come at this industry from a big pub mentality, and I super appreciate all of your experience, and I hope that my feelings don't make you feel invalidated. By the way, I was just having a similar conversation that you and I have had before with longtime Dark Horse editor Diana Schutz. So before I forget that, I just want to mention to you specifically, Jana, we should grab Diana and you and me and other folks and make a panel about this. I proposed this to Diana and she was like, heck yes, let's make this happen. So as a brief aside, let's all talk about this in public sometime.
Let's do it with Tom Hart. He is another
awesome.
person.
Awesome. Okay. Lots of thoughts, but to hone back in on your thoughts, yes, I feel like this need for external validation is especially prevalent in what we're doing in publishing. And there are so many instances where I see folks, and Jana, again, you can stop me if I'm saying things out of turn here, but there are many folks who strive for that publishing deal. That what is that? What is a publishing deal? Essentially, it's somebody saying, okay, you're good enough, we'll accept you. When really you could self-publish your work. There are trade-offs there. There's pros and cons on each side. I like to do weird stuff. I want to illustrate a 40-year-old poem that my grandpa made, right? Imagine if I went to any publisher, pick a publisher, and I'd say, hey, publisher, I've got this 40-year-old poem. My grandpa made it. I want to make a comic about it. And oh yeah, I want to publish this at an unreasonably tiny size to replicate this whole like poetry chapbook format. And it's got to be full color. The whole thing has to be on uncoated paper stock. And what do you think? Oh yeah, it's saddle stitched, so it can't sit on a traditional bookshop shelf. It's only going to be 32 pages. How about that, publisher? There's not a publisher around that would say yes to that. And even if there was, even let's play pretend. So magical publisher appears and says, yes, let's do that. I guarantee you, I am not going to see 5 figures from a tiny little 32-page saddle-stitched comic book. I guarantee you. But you saw those numbers from my past campaign. It's all public. And so if you're willing to do just a little bit of extra work, and it is not much extra work. In my opinion, publishers do a grossly small amount of work for the amount of payment they receive. Conversely, creative folks do the lion's share of the work and get this sort of remuneration from publishers. So those are my opinions about publishing. But Jana, you also mentioned, I wonder if this feeling or want or need for external validation might be more prevalent in women. And I am not a woman, so I cannot speak to that. But I have many conversations with my wife, and there are so many instances where she is just killing it. Like she's also a professor. She's way higher up on the rungs than I am. She's the director of a center on campus. Associate director of a center on campus. And just like amazing in her field. She came out with her own book on African photography in Mali specifically. And I'll have to put a link in the chat here just so folks can see that, because I'm so super proud of what she did. It's her 20 years of research all compiled into this amazing book. So anyway, she is amazing, right? And I see her questioning, like, am I doing things right? Do I need some mentoring? Do I need this or that? And one of the things that I've gotten involved in with cross-stitching, and I know this sounds like it's completely separate, but bear with me for a second. So I'm part of a cross-stitching group on Facebook called Snarky and Modern Cross Stitch, where mostly women, like this is a traditionally female art form, mostly women are in there, and there are some amazing political pieces being done in cross stitch. And probably my favorite one is this, like, cross stitch and a hoop, very traditional. It's got this like floral pattern around it. And then on the inside, it says, carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. And I'm just like, I need to make that for my wife. That's perfect. Like, that is what you need. Like, just consider yourself amazing, because you are. And so I hope that feeling of self-confidence for all of us. Yeah. So anyway, those are some thoughts for your thoughts, Janet.
Thank you. Yeah, we could definitely talk more on this issue, and we should definitely connect about the Diana Schutz and you and Tom Hart and me. Maybe actually Tom Hart and I saw each other at SPX in Bethesda in September, and we just ran into each other. We start talking like, blah, 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 what's going on? Because he runs an online community for comics creators like I do, and so we always have a lot of stuff to talk about. Mm-hmm. And then we started talking about money stuff, and we were just telling anecdotes to each other about like accounting and bookkeeping and spreadsheets and actual numbers, and then we're like, we should do a panel where it's just like Tom and Jana talk dollars for comics creators. Because wow, there's just self-confidence plus money plus art. It's a really winning combination.
Yeah. And, with all this said, I was having a conversation with Diana Schutz, who, if folks don't know, was a 40-year veteran of the comics industry, worked for Dark Horse Comics for, was it 30 or 40 years? I'm trying to remember at this point. She's still translating comics. The most recent Black Sad comic that just came out in English is because of her translations. She's still very involved. I brought her to Michigan State University a few years back as one of our keynote speakers. And so we're still in contact today. And, I was mentioning my thoughts on publishing versus self-publishing, and she took some issue with some of my thoughts. And I really appreciate that there was some pushback, because she's like, look, I worked at a larger publisher for the majority of my career, and I'd like to think that I was not doing people wrong. But, I think there's a healthy conversation to have there. And I appreciate Diana so much, because we were able to have that candid conversation and respect one another's opinions, and maybe add some nuance to one another's opinions. And when I mentioned this whole idea of you, Jana, and me, and her, and maybe somebody else getting on a panel together and talking about modern publishing versus self-publishing, it's a conversation that has happened before, but I think a healthy amount of that conversation happened in like the late 80s and early 90s with the black and white boom with Cerebus and Bone and Strangers in Paradise. And it hasn't really had a good conversation since that time. And there's been a ton of change in the industry, both in big pubs and self-publishing since that time. We used to have the Xeric grant, and it was like, the one shining light of the possibility of a self-publisher getting a little bit of money to like move themselves forward. But the Xeric grant is no longer, because Kickstarter, like Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird basically said, look, we've been doing this thing to help up and coming comic book artists move along in their ranks, but like, look at this thing happening over here. Like, it's kind of taken the place of what we do, and it can help way more people than we can. I think they were giving out like 5 or 6 $5,000 grants a couple times a year. But like, go look at Kickstarter. There's hundreds of comics campaigns every month on there. And this is nuts. 80% of comics campaigns right now are getting funded. So the chances of you reaching your goal are very good. And that's not always been the case. I just had Oriana Leckert, the comics and publications director of Kickstarter, come speak to my class. And she told us that statistic, and it just blew my mind, because for so long, the success rate of comics on Kickstarter were below 50%. Less than half of the campaigns were successfully funding. Now, 4 out of every 5 campaigns are funding.
Wow. That is really, really interesting. We actually are going to have Ngozi Ukazu speak to Kids Comics Unite in, I think, December. Yeah, that's going to be a big one. That's a heavy hitter. Ryan, you should be there.
I want to be there.
Yeah, Ngozi Ukazu is a creator who had one of the highest funded comics campaigns in Kickstarter history. Her comic called Check Please, and she is amazing. So I can't wait for that. So, okay, we got to wrap this up really soon, but I want to circle back to a really technical question, Ryan. How long did it take you to put together that Kickstarter page? And if maybe you could break it down into phases, like the thinking phase, like how long did it take you to like think about what you wanted on the page, and then to actually write the text and put together the videos and all that stuff?
Sure. Let's just hop back to a screen share here real quick so that I can share that page with you, and maybe that will jog my memory a little bit. Okay. So this looks big and unwieldy, right? But believe it or not, this is kind of broken up into different sections. So the first section is called the purpose. So like, why is this project important? Why am I doing this? Why should you care? So that was the first thing I wanted people to see. After that, what is this project? What are you making? And so I describe the book and what that looks like, and give some examples so that people can see if this is something they're even interested in. After that, I introduce myself and then talk about how you can get this book. So then you see the rewards. And from there, there's some more information like add-ons. This is something I'm doing for the very first time. This is a feature that has been available on Kickstarter for maybe a year or 2 at this point. I did not want to do it on my last campaign, but I thought I'd give it a try here. So basically, if you want to create a reward tier that does not exist, you can do that. For example, maybe you want 2 sets of those prints, not just 1 set. So you could add that on to an existing print tier and then get the book and 2 print sets instead of 1 print set. Or maybe you want a tier where there are 2 books or 3 books instead of 1 book or 5 books that I have. So you can basically create your own custom tier with these add-ons. Additionally, I'm also pulling from my back catalog of work. So if somebody's coming to this campaign for the first time and they're like, oh, who's this Ryan Claytor guy? Well, here's a bunch of work that I've done in the past, and you can add these books on to your reward tier. So that's another section. This green guarantee. So I didn't even mention this, but for this campaign, I've partnered with a reforestation organization called One Tree Planted. And for every backer of the campaign, we are going to plant 1 tree. So I've got, 160 backers. There's going to be 160 trees planted because of this Kickstarter campaign. And after that, I've got the timeline. So if people are wondering, well, how in the heck am I going to get this by the holidays? Well, here's when the Kickstarter runs. The book printing will last about 2.5 weeks. I threw a contingency week in there just to make sure that, what if there's troubles with files or whatever, or a delay in shipping. Okay, so there's a contingency week. Then I gave myself a good couple of weeks to pack the rewards. There's not going to be as many books as there was in A Hunter's Tale, so I think I'll be just fine with that. And then I'll toss them all in a mailbox, take about a week to deliver to you, and everybody should have them by mid-December. So just to let people know what I'm thinking. And then why do I need $1,200? I always think it's really nice to see a budget from people, so that it's not just some blind amount of like, I need $3,000. Well, why is it that you need $3,000? So I really tried to go pretty granular about this and let people know that I'm thinking about not only printing, but packing, shipping, fees, etc. And then here's a little secret for everyone considering self-publishing. This thing you're looking at right here gave me a 15% discount on my printing. How did that happen? I found the printer that I wanted to use. When I printed A Hunter's Tale, it was with a local printer, BRD Printing, who does amazing work, but they do not do hardback books. So I looked around for a low-run hardback book printer. In fact, you can even go back and comb some of the threads on Kids Comics Unite, and you can see me asking around about this. So this is what I was looking for. So anyway, I found the printer I wanted to go with. And once I did, and I was in conversation with them saying, hey, this is the type of book I want to print. It's going to look like this, have these details. Then I reached out and said, hey, for my last campaign, I worked with my local printer to get a 20% discount for one, listing them on my Kickstarter page, and two, including them in the indicia of my book. So if you guys don't know, the indicia is that tiny text at the start of every book that says copyright whoever 2022 that nobody reads, right? It's just a bunch of tiny text. But I said, if you give me an additional X% off, I will include your name and URL in the indicia of my book. Now, a lot of people just do that anyway, printed in China or printed in the United States or printed by BRD Printing. But why would you do that for free? That's advertising. So make the printer pay you for that. And so anyway, long story short, I made a proposal to them and they said, okay, we'll give you a 15% discount for that. So by that token, I was able to lower my funding goal. It was going to be a $1,600 funding goal. It's now a $1,200 funding goal. I had a bunch of stretch goals planned out that were this much, and I was able to bring those down quite a bit because of this discount. Okay. And then risks and challenges. So Jana, to answer your question, this looks big and unwieldy, but really I just took it by sections. Why is this important? What is the project? Who the heck am I to do this? And just cycle through those different portions. And if you look, each of those portions are not too onerous. Yes, it does take a while to set up a Kickstarter page. One thing that really surprised me from doing this add-on menu for the very first time was just this graphic. This add-on menu graphic literally took me an entire day of my life to make. that one graphic. Now that graphic is done and I can reuse it for my next campaign. So it will not take me a day of my life next time. But this time it took a long time. But I'm so glad I did, because there's been a healthy amount of funding due to add-ons. So Jana, I don't know if I answered your question. How long did it take for me to make this Kickstarter page? All said and done, I'd guess maybe a week. If I had to give a solid number to it. But it's sort of like okay, I started the page and now I step away and I do some mirror drawings, and I'm tired of drawing, so I'll do a little business stuff. Okay, I'm going to write out why this project is important, and then step away for another couple days. So it's hard to say this takes this long. It was like, you know, little bits and pieces along the way. Hope that helps.
Yes. Yes, that is so helpful. This was just fantastic, Ryan. You're definitely in our pantheon of greats. Kids Comics Unite speaker of the year.
Oh, Jana, you're gonna make my head not fit out of this room. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes. All right, everybody, if you could unmute yourself and say thank you. This was fantastic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.